Hi guys, so today's video is going to be young adult fantasy versus adult fantasy, specifically with the concept of which is more accessible. This is not supposed to be me deciding which one is better or anything like that. I just think it's very common for people who love books to occasionally fall into these misconceptions about genres, about age ranges, things like that. And I think that there's a lot of subtleties that are involved when comparing things that kind of get lost because we only have our own personal experiences to draw from. So I wanted to do this particular video first because accessibility was something that, to the best of my abilities, I could try to present objectively and just present facts. A little rundown of how I went about this little experiment. So I decided I would use Scribd because of the fact that Scribd is more affordable than Audible is. For those of you that don't know, both of these are services that provide audiobooks, although Scribd also has ebooks and a few other things, where Audible is pretty much just audiobooks, but Audible is $15 a month and you get one book, where Scribd is, I believe, $8.99, and you get access to a lot. It's a streaming service, so it's not just one, you have access to their entire library. When talking about what is more affordable, what is more available, I thought I would go ahead and stick with Scribd. If somebody doesn't have as much money, that to me seems like the better option. It makes more sense that if you had to choose one over the other and you're a voracious reader, a voracious listener, I just thought that would be the one you would go with. Then it was really important for me to make sure that this was something to pull from with the community and not just a list of books that I like, or I didn't want any kind of bias to come through where I was only selecting books that deep down I was like, oh, well, this one probably won't be there, so that'll prove a certain point, or this one will be there, which will prove a certain point. Whatever the case may be, I want to, as much as possible, present this without my own personal feelings involved. So when I was looking up, trying to figure out what books am I going to choose for this little experiment, I originally was looking up best of lists, best fantasy of all time, best young adult fantasy, that sort of thing. But the problem with me doing this was that I rarely could find a website that had both as their own separate lists. There were websites that had best fantasy, and that just included a bunch of different age ranges. There was best young adult, and that would have middle grade lumped in, and middle grade and young adult aren't the same thing. Ultimately, I found the best way to go about this and to be the most consistent would be to use Goodreads Choice Award nominees. So on Goodreads for the year of 2019, we have their list of fantasy books, and then we have their list of young adult books, and then the same thing for the year 2018. I wanted to use 2 different years because sometimes books aren't going to be available on these streaming services when they're brand new. Sometimes you have to wait a little bit and then they'll pop up. So I did want to compare newer books to books that are just a little bit older so that we have both frames of reference. I also thought this would be good to pull from because Goodreads is a resource where it kind of shows you the popular stuff, the stuff that people are talking about. I didn't want to pull from what I thought was popular and turns out actually not a lot of people have heard about it. I wanted to pull from something that definitely reflects the community's views. I'm just going to run through really quick so you don't have to check Goodreads yourself. I'm going to run through the list of nominees for 2019. I did have 20 total, but I had to take one off because on the adult fantasy one, randomly, there was a Cassandra Clare young adult book, so I ended up doing 19 books, and I went ahead and took one of them off from the young adult category too. So listing those off, we have Ninth House, The Starless Sea, Fire and Blood, Priory of the Orange Tree, The Winter of the Witch, Of Blood and Bone, Storm Cursed, Black Leopard, Red Wolf, Middle Game, The 10,000 Doors of January, Gods of Jade and Shadow, Kingdom of Copper, The Dragon Republic, Dark Dawn, Magic for Liars, The Burning White, Age of Legends, A Little Hatred, and Holy Sister. Out of those 19 books, only 6 of them were available on Scribd. Over on young adult, the list would be Wicked King, Wayward Son, Queen of Air and Darkness, King of Scars, Wilder Girls, The Toll, A Curse So Dark and Lonely, Finale, Sorcery of Thorns, Aurora Rising, Supernova, Defy Me, Blood Witch, Call Down the Hawk, Four Dead Queens, Rebel, Serpent and Dove, We Hunt the Flame, and Gilded Wolves. Of those 19 books, 11 of them were listed on Scribd. So looking at just the year of 2019, young adult books were definitely more accessible on Scribd. I was surprised that only 6 of the 19 on the adult side were available and 11, almost twice as many on the young adult, were available. However, for the year 2018, the numbers were almost matched. You had 9 out of 20 for adult and then 10 out of 20 for young adult. So just based off of what is popular, it seems like on average you have about half or more for young adult, just based on those 2 years. If I wanted to get really accurate information, I would do this for the past 10 years and then see what it was. But for the past 2 years, it seems like the young adult books are definitely on average about half available. And then with the adult, the numbers speak for themselves, less than half. I do want to address a couple other things when talking about this, because the numbers, while young adult is winning, if you will, they're not overwhelming. It's not like there's so many more young adult books that it's conclusive. Like, yeah, young adult's way more accessible. So I want to address a couple other things. One would be price. If you're going out to buy these books, also, young adult books are much cheaper. I compared the numbers for the books in 2019 based off of Amazon's prices and then the books from 2018. For the sake of consistency in 2019, I pulled from how much it costs to get these books in hardback, which I know is not going to be the cheaper option, but that's because if you're buying these books, because they came out in 2019, not all of them are available in paperback yet. Most of the time, hardbacks come out first, then the paperbacks come out. So to keep it consistent, I just was looking at the price of the hardbacks, and with the adult books, the price came out to $349, and then the price for the young adult books came out to $222. If you were to buy 19 books and you had to choose between the adult and the young adult for financial reasons, it's obviously much cheaper to purchase the young adult books. And I know a lot of times people think, oh, well, young adult tends to be smaller in page count, and then therefore it costs less to print, which there is some validity in that. If you're looking at some giant tome like Way of Kings, yeah, I would expect Way of Kings to cost more, but that's not always the case. Looking at 2 books that I have on my shelf, these are both the same size, and actually the young adult book is slightly longer, but it's significantly cheaper. When it was brand new, it was $18.99, whereas this one brand new was $27.99. That's a huge difference for 2 books that are the same size, and one of them, the cheaper one, is longer. Of course, the difference in prices definitely went down when comparing the books from 2018, where I was looking at the paperbacks instead of the hardbacks. And so with those, I did have to alter it slightly because one of the books wasn't available at all in physical form, so I had to take that one off the list for adult books, and then that meant I had to take one off the list from young adult, just to be fair. And then there were a couple of them that I couldn't find a paperback available. There was 2 of them that happened for. So I still tried to always go with the cheapest option of physical form. And when looking at the numbers for paperbacks, the difference was $50. I want to address one more thing with this entire topic, which would be libraries, right? Because libraries are free. You don't have to pay to get a book from the library. You don't have to have some kind of subscription service. You just go to the library. But I was afraid that if I looked up my own individual library system and I compared how available the adult fantasy books were to young adult, that's so specific to me and where I live that it really wouldn't be a good reflection for the greater US. However, just speaking from my personal experiences, the library tends to often have things on hold. Whenever I hear people say, like, well, they can just go to the library, you don't have to buy books. Have you tried checking out popular books from the library? They're often on hold for like 6 months, and that's true of the audiobooks as well. And often when you find digital resources like Overdrive or Hoopla, those sorts of things, it's hard to find stuff there as well. So a lot of times you're looking at books that are older, which there's nothing wrong with, and I think that's fantastic. But often I see so many people wanting to have discussions about newer books or wanting to be included in the conversation, which I think is completely fair. And it's hard to do that when you have to wait at least 6 months to get your hands on a book. Also, not everybody's library system is as good as other people's. Obviously, I think that goes without saying. So I wanted to, for fun, to add on to this and maybe provide a little bit more context, or at least present some other information that I found really fascinating, which would be in the United States where I live, where are the libraries that are considered the best libraries. And what's really funny, I thought this was kind of ironic, given what libraries are for. When I searched best libraries in the US, the first thing that popped up was most beautiful, and I was like, I'm not looking for a pretty library, I'm looking for a good library. I went ahead though and found a website that had a list of the top libraries in the US based off of a few different elements. I'll go ahead and link the website where I found this list. What I found really interesting was I went ahead and compared that to the cities in the US with the best transportation, public transportation. Out of all of these, 6 of the cities themselves, not just the states, but 6 of these cities were also listed as having some of the best transportation. If we go ahead and look at just the states, then there are 7, because San Francisco is considered to have one of the best public transportations, where San Diego was one of the cities with one of the best libraries, and obviously San Francisco and San Diego are 2 different places. They just both happen to be in California, but otherwise 6 are the exact same cities, which I thought was super interesting. The reason I thought this was worth noting is kind of that whole idea of, I'm not saying that like if you live in these cities you're rich, but you know that saying like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's that idea. Not only do a lot of these cities have phenomenal libraries, but then they also have great transportation, which makes it that much easier to get to your library. But if you live in a more rural area, access to your physical library might not be as good. So then you're having to rely on digital resources, and a lot of times digital resources, you have a really long waiting list. And if you then are like, I don't want to have to wait 6 months to read this book that people are talking about, I want to participate in the conversation, it sounds good, I want to read it, and you go to a subscription service like Scribd, your chances of finding young adult books is higher than it is for adult books. And if you just want to purchase the books from Amazon, it's a lot cheaper with young adult than it is with adult. Of course, these results would probably fluctuate if I were looking at different books. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Just because the results that I got ended up favoring young adult for being more accessible than adult doesn't mean that if I looked at different books, it wouldn't be different. Of course, the results are going to change when you have different books. I just don't know if it's going to consistently favor young adult depending on what you're looking at, or if it's going to fluctuate. Young adult, though, it did end up winning in these results. So I think it's just important in general, whether or not somebody likes one or the other more, just to understand that one of them is, on average, based off of these, one of them is a little cheaper and a little easier to get a hold of. In the future, if you have any suggestions for other types of videos like this that you would like me to do, they don't have to involve young adult and adult. They can involve other things, but I would be happy to look into it and do the research, because I was really surprised by these numbers. I wasn't sure what I was going to see, but if you have other ideas for adult versus young adult fantasy, where as much as possible we can look at things objectively and not just be like, but I just like this one better. Whatever your ideas are, I would love to see them. If you have other things that you would like to add to all of this, other things that might come into play, leave that, because I would love to be like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. There's that too. And I just think it's a cool conversation to have. But anyway, have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.